Hey guys, what's up? It's Alec Torelli, and on this episode of The Bridge, I'd like to connect you to an idea that I learned in the Bankless podcast with Josh Rosenthal, connecting what happened in the Renaissance to what's happening today, the crypto renaissance that we're living through right now. So the ideas come from this podcast. I highly encourage you to check it out. It's in the link in the description. And basically, Josh Rosenthal is a PhD professor of medieval history, and he draws the parallels between the technologies that emerged from the Renaissance and what's happening right now, and how we're living through another historic time, a once in a millennia, let's say, historic event that sometimes, because we're so in the middle of, it's really hard to see. But when historians look back on the pivotal moments of history that changed the way the world operated, that humans operated, that we have lived and evolved as a society forever, we're going to look back on this period that we are in right now. And so I would like to bring you back to the medieval ages and the Renaissance, and two technologies, mainly one, but really two technologies that emerged that went from these top-down hierarchical systems of, the government has all the control in a centralized way, to a decentralized economy where the people have the information and the power, and the technologies that emerged that made that possible, and then bring you to today with two technologies that are happening right now in front of our eyes that are doing the exact same thing. Because when we look further into the past, it is said we can see further into the future. A great quote, I think, from Winston Churchill, and it's really, really true. So we're looking 500 years into the past to see 500 years into the future about a pivotal moment that we're living through right now, which is going to change the scope of the world forever. So the idea coming out of the Renaissance was that led to the Renaissance out of the Dark Ages was that in the 15th century, or 14th, 15th century, the Medici family used a distributed ledger as a way to change the financial system of the time. And they became extremely wealthy, and they adopted a technology that actually came out of the Roman era to basically have a new way of using a financial system. The second technology that came out of that era was the printing press by Guggenheim. And this allowed information to be decentralized for the first time in history. And so what happened was really the Roman Catholic Church controlled all of the information, and because people were illiterate, you basically thought and believed and knew what they wanted you to think, believe, and know. But when the printing press came about, it basically, they tried to regulate it over time. They tried to have like a system where you had to register, so to speak, to be able to print and share ideas. But over time, it became so easy for anyone to access a printing press and anyone to be able to print ideas that it just fell by the wayside. And so basically the only game in town was you can't beat them, join them. And over time, the Roman Catholic Church eventually utilized the printing press. They adopted this technology, and they basically allowed competition to exist whereby anyone could print ideas, and new mediums came into play that didn't exist before. So there were like graphic mediums that allowed people to learn ideas. Martin Luther was famous for this with memes that he produced, which is a great analogy to what's happening today as well. But memes that he produced about to wake up the working class of farmers to be anti-establishment against the church, to say that we didn't need the ideas of the church, we didn't need to endorse these power institutions, that we the people had the power. And so this idea was in a graphic, so that anyone that wasn't literate could see it and comprehend it and be emotionally attached to that idea. And so this printing press really decentralized information and allowed information to be had by everyone instead of being concentrated in the Roman Catholic Church. And so that really dismantled their monopoly on power. And so what's happening today, and the analogies that Josh brings us to, is what's happening today is there's two technologies that are coming out that we're living through that are basically going to be seen as one when we look back on history, because they're happening in such a short time frame. They seem far apart for us that are living through it because we judge things in a narrow time window. But when we're looking back on the macro lens of history, 1,000 years from now, they're going to be seen as one emergent property of technology. And basically it's the internet and the blockchain. And so the internet allows information to be completely decentralized in a way that's never been had before, where anyone can have access to all of the world's information. And then the blockchain doing the same thing with value, allowing not having value necessarily having to be stored at the government or the centralized level with banks and governments, but now everyone can have access to capital and they could transfer capital in a permissionless, decentralized way. And so it's really fascinating to look through this lens. I highly encourage you to check out the podcast. And it's really interesting to look at it from a historical vantage point because this guy's an expert in history and he basically understands moments in history that we're living through that to us seem kind of hard to quantify, hard to understand, or trivial, perhaps, but that actually are revolutionary because we can't see them because we're so close to them. Kind of like when you're too close to a decision that you have to make in life, you can't necessarily see it objectively because you're so in it. And so we're in the moment that we're living in. We're living through this transition, this transitory phase, and so it's sometimes hard for us to understand this revolution of what's really happening. But I don't think that a lot of people have fully understood how the internet is going to change the world, where everyone has access to information and everyone could then be specialized in something, and it allows for all these different niches and all these different like spaces of work to be created that didn't otherwise exist, because now you can be an expert in anything, and everyone is becoming their own sort of personal monopoly through that decentralization of information in a way that's never happened. So you can be an expert in, you can have a YouTube channel, for example, on like specifically, cash game poker strategy, which was never an option before. It was never a marketplace before. It was never a niche before, because the information was concentrated in, 10 or 20 or 50 different TV channels where there was only like a marketplace for specific things. Whereas now with the internet, anyone can have their own voice. And so there's 7 billion monopolies and there's 7 billion opportunities for everyone to have their own channel of information, and they become their own expert. And so that's what the internet is providing, that framework for that. And when it comes to crypto, when it comes to the blockchain, it's allowing that to happen with value. And so it's really revolutionary because value is allowed to be exchanged from peer to peer without the need for a central authority. And so there's no one person that's blocking access to capital. And this might not seem like a big deal in the Western world, where we're granted permission by central authorities to use the legacy financial system, and that's pretty easy to gain access to in the first world. But there's 2 billion people that are unbanked, so they completely are off the grid, and they are completely separated out from the world economy. And when they can access capital through an app on their smartphone because of the blockchain, because nobody can take them away from the financial system, it paves the way for the sovereign individual, where we're going to see, I think, in the future, the breakdown of nation states. They're not going to become as centralized, and the powers are not going to be as centralized. They're going to be more decentralized. And that's something that is very hard to see, in the same way that the guy uses a great analogy of the farmer working in the Middle Ages never thought that there would be a different way of life. They never even thought to question the way that the world worked, that the way that the society that they lived in operated, because they didn't even know that there was a different way. And until this information became decentralized, until people saw that there was another, the emergence of the working class into being able to do specialized things because of the new financial system and the new information system that existed, they weren't even aware that there was these new opportunities for an economy or a specialization to be available to them. They just thought that the only way of life was to always be a farmer, and never really even question the way that the world operated. And so in the same way that we operate in a society today, where a lot of people live in a situation where we live in a very centralized place, power is concentrated in centralized areas, where it's like major corporations, major companies, and individuals are left out of that. Individuals are not necessarily shareholders of the products and services that they use and operate with on a daily basis. But imagine an economy, imagine a world where blockchain empowers that. So we're going to live in a world soon where, and soon might be arbitrary in the sense that it might not happen in the next year or 2 years, which is a lot of people's definition of soon. But when you zoom out and you look at decades long or centuries long, it's going to seem very soon on this time frame where we are right now, because we're living through it. But basically, we're going to live in a world where individuals become empowered as shareholders, because everyone becomes owners of the products and services they're using, and this is going to happen through the blockchain. So there's going to be less concentration of power from nation states and less concentration of power from corporations, and it's going to be a much more decentralized system that we're going to live in, because of the blockchain empowering financial freedom, frankly. And it's really fascinating to live through. So I highly encourage you to check out the podcast and learn more about and participate in the revolution that we're living through, because it's really cool to be on, let's say, the right side of history, but it's kind of like one of those things where once the genie's out of the bottle, it can't be poked back in, and this is like an inevitable phenomenon that's happening just because the technology exists, because efficiency always wins, and this technology is like destined to reach its level of maturity, let's so to speak. And so one of the other great analogies that I'll leave you with that I hope implores you to check out the podcast is basically, he uses the analogy of Martin Luther being like a pivotal person in history that disrupted the consensus idea that the church was the only establishment of power that existed in the modern world, right? And that they had all the power and control, and you had to listen to their ideas. And he kind of like disrupted that, and he made it more about the people. And so the analogy that Rosenthal uses in the podcast is that we're going to look back on history at Satoshi Nakamoto, the founder of blockchain technology, and see him in largely the same way, that because he like unleashed this emergent technology into the world, that was the impetus for the global change we're going to see in the way society operates, because that technology of transferring value peer-to-peer without a centralized authority now exists. And it's hard to see because we're so early. This technology is 10 years old. We're so in the middle of it, and we're slowly starting to see the seeds of that technology being planted. But when we zoom out, when we look back, we're going to realize that, wow, we lived through one of the most transformative times in all of human history. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Alec Torelli. If you like this, subscribe to this channel. If you want more bridge ideas where I bring ideas and share them with you in a simple, easy way to understand, that's what I do here on this channel. So I hope you enjoy this. Give it a like. Let me know your thoughts in a comment. Thanks for your attention. I'll see you in the next one.